practice on the ground in countries. So we can really demonstrate what the solutions look like as good examples for the region and beyond. So secondly, it's about growing low-carbon business and finance opportunities. And this means creating opportunities for businesses in the low-carbon sector and promoting the financing solutions that are going to be most effective for renewable energy projects. And now WWF Vietnam team works closely with companies in the textile sector particularly to support decarbonisation. The team developed, for example, guidelines on greenhouse gas inventories for textiles and dyeing sector. So our third line is, as I was saying, is demonstrating the efficient and renewable energy solutions. And this means showcasing the latest low-carbon energy technologies through initiatives like renewable energy procurement, converting boiler feedstock to replace coal, implementing energy efficiency and renewable energy solutions in industrial parks. So this whole shift from the fossil fuels, in this case from coal, to energy efficient applications and renewable energies is critical for that. And that's in the textile and the dairy sectors, in rural areas, in healthcare. In India, the WWF team, as part of the work in the dairy cold chain sector, they've influenced the inclusion of instant milk chillers, for example, for subsidy access and easier procurement. So again, it's a practical example of the application. And the fourth one I wanted to mention, just part of this whole process, is sharing knowledge and building capacity. So sharing information about the best practices and the expertise to remove the barriers, accelerate the pace of this energy transition. Now, this includes conducting studies on renewable energy financing, establishing unified trade markets, implementing green tariffs and safeguards for renewable energy infrastructure. So it's really all the facilitating measures to try to take this transition forward. And again, a practical example, the Indonesia team from WWF works with companies through the net zero platform to support companies with their decarbonisation plans. So that was just to try to give you a bit of an idea of what this Climate Solutions Partnership is about. But what we don't want today is this to be a one-way session for us to be lecturing from here. And I don't like these podiums and platforms. Much rather be hearing from you about what are the issues that are interesting to you and what experiences do you have. And clearly we have some panelists here who are going to have particular experience through Climate Solutions Partnership and other activities they're involved with, who can give us some information. But we also want to hear from people in the room any particular priorities that you see, any issues that you would like for us to consider. So the main objectives today, I've got three specific issues that I thought were particularly relevant. So one is sharing learnings and best practices, just so we can try to accelerate this transition. Anybody that's been here for the last week, you'll have heard the timing of the energy transition is a critical factor. It's not a question of whether we should be doing it anymore. It's a matter of how quickly we can do it and how quickly we can move from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Now, if we can share experience and the practices we've already had in this area, hopefully that means we can take the best experience and move that forward as quickly as possible. So that's the first one. The second one, I think I've mentioned to one or two of the panelists earlier, and talking about the Climate Solutions Partnership, is the regional cooperation. So often we have individual activities in different countries, and of course every country is different, so you have to have some degree of focus on different country conditions. But there are also principles involved in this process which are common, and by learning from each other and different countries, comparing their approaches, comparing their results, the solutions they've achieved, and the mistakes that have been made, some of the things that perhaps shouldn't have been done or could have been done better. So rather than letting other countries have to go through that process, let's share that experience so that as a region we can push forward as quickly as possible to achieve our net zero objectives in a time frame that's as short as we can. So then thirdly, we wanted to look at identifying further actions. So trying to use this discussion as a platform to say, look, okay, yes, we can see the need to move this forward, and we can see the sort of things that we're doing at the moment, but what else can we do in practice to try to take the steps to move ahead? And that's going to be dependent upon all of the issues that need to come together to have a successful intervention. When I say all issues, I'm talking about the policy frameworks, the regulation, the legislation structures, the financing, the investment that's got to be required. We need to understand that so we can decide which are the most appropriate actions to take forwards. Then, of course, it's the implementation and the activity on the ground, how we can bring these measures to be practical interventions, not just talking about these things, but actually implementing them. So that's the main structure. As I said, what I would like to do is to involve everybody here. So please, as we're going through this, don't feel like you can just sit on your laptops and your cell phones, for the entire duration, because we want to hear from you, okay, and hear about what issues you think are important and your knowledge we want to bring into this conversation. Before we do that, we're going to bring up our 4 panelists for the discussion. I'm going to invite them up to sit at the chairs at the front, if that's possible. Any order is fine, but please, if you want to come up. Thank you. So in brief, the people you see here, and I'll go from the far side, is Dr. Shen, who's the Executive Vice President Chairman of the Quality Management Committee at NEO. And for those that haven't heard of NEO before, if you're like me, that's the electric vehicle company. So they've got very much vested interest in seeing this transition moving forwards. Then I think we have Anindita Satria Surya, who's the Vice President for Energy Transition and Climate Change at Indonesia's utility, PLN. So thanks very much for joining us. Then on we've spoken about the finance issues being critical in this process. So great that we've got Tim Evans, who's the CEO of HSBC in Vietnam. So thanks very much, Tim, for joining us. And nearest to me, okay, it was nearest to me. now second in the row, the lady on the panel is Jennifer Lake, and Jennifer is the Global Director for Energy at the World Resources Institute, who is one of our partners together with HSBC, as I've mentioned before, on the Climate Solutions Partnership. So very pleased to have our panelists, different perspectives of the issues that we want to be trying to be looking at. So I'm going to ask each of you individually a quick question, but please, as I said, on the audience, if you've any issues that you think you want some different question or you want to raise another follow-up to any of the panelists, then please go ahead. I don't want this to be a session which is going to be all scripted and we've written all this in advance and here are all the answers to the questions that we've already practiced. We want to hear from you. Okay, so what are the issues that you think need to be raised? But to start us off, I thought just to try a global perspective, Jennifer, I'm going to aim this at you. The challenges and opportunities. We talk about energy transition, lots of different perspectives. It's really a big part of the COP28 at the moment. I think everywhere we go, we're hearing about energy transitions and different ways of proceeding with that. But from your perspective, what would you say were the biggest challenges and opportunities that we should be considering?
Thank you, and wonderful to be here with all of you. This is a moment at COP where I think we all know there is a lot that hangs in the balance. And I've been incredibly pleased to see how we're moving forward with an energy transition agenda at the heart of what we're doing together. The reality is that demand for energy is continuing to increase at unprecedented rates, really, when you look at it, and that is an incredibly important part of our development agenda. So as we look at this energy transition agenda, it has to be grounded in the realities of wanting to bring all people into that agenda. When I look at that challenge and that opportunity, it means that we have to focus on a systems level approach. It means that we have to think about how every aspect of our economies, and particularly economies in Asia, are building for a clean energy future. The question that we've seen is, this tripling of renewables, doubling of efficiency, and I believe that aspirationally that is something almost every country in the world would agree to. The elements of the how are the challenge for us. And in Asia, the industrial decarbonization agenda has to be front and center. We know that there are rules, regulations, tariff structures, market design issues that inhibit the ability for utilities to make that transition. There is a whole set of activities that need to be done in that space to allow for clean electricity. And the only way we're going to get to the combined achievement of a tripling of renewables and a doubling of energy efficiency is if we electrify everything and get renewables to be able to provide that power. So the industrial agenda is critical, Asia is critical. It's both the supply and the demand that we have to be focusing on. And it's not just thinking through specifically where and how the technologies come into play, it's how we fund that. How will money reach those who need it in order to make those transitions happen? And what are the terms on which those are happening? We've heard a lot about interest rates and the challenges that we're facing in terms of getting what we need. I also just want to pause and talk about the fact that this is about people as well. People and the inclusion in the energy, clean energy economy has to be part of what we deliver. And no transition can be socially acceptable if we're not bringing all people into that. How do we get electric two-wheelers, three-wheelers? How do we improve human health, human well-being by looking at this transition? And I believe that in Asia, more than anywhere, we have this recognition of, and I've been so pleased with what India has done in terms of their G20 leadership on the life agenda, right? And building forward a view of what does the consumer, how does the consumer engage in this? So I know there are a lot more things I could talk about, but I want to recognize that we are talking about systems level thinking, and that targeting one actor in the system without recognizing that we need new business models, new financial structures, new engagements with consumers, including industrial consumers, will leave us falling short in that concerted effort to bring both supply and demand forward.
Right. No, thanks very much, Jennifer. Now, one of the sort of goals, the focus for this event is what you've mentioned, this whole just energy transition. Now, I've heard lots about just energy transition, and in fact, we work on that area as well. What does it mean to you? Is everybody out there very clear on just energy transition? Because I'm feeling that there's a lot of these conversations, the dialogue is saying, yes, just energy transition, let's have a just energy transition. And there's a lot of confused looking faces out there. And I'm just wondering, any thoughts on that? Anybody out in the audience who wants to tell me what is a just energy transition? Affordability. Okay, so no one left behind from a social perspective. And from a social perspective, meaning? Okay, one second. Have we got a mic? Great, thanks.
Should I just?
Yeah, please, yeah.
Yeah, so I think to me, just transition.
Yeah.
At least in the context of emerging country like Vietnam, it means affordability, and no one is left behind from a social impact point of view, whereby we are a country where we highly reliant on fossil fuel traditionally, and now we try to convert into more renewable energy led, and therefore that leaves a large population that seems to be like living on fossil fuel for their whole life.
Right.
So how we can make them and kind of handhold them along to the new journey is very important.
No, that's great. That's a nice way of describing, I think, because we've got to realise that there are lots of people that are involved with fossil fuels. Their livelihoods depend upon fossil fuels, and it's not just the fossil fuels; it's the whole supply chain, which is associated with the fossil fuel industry. Now, if we say to all of those people, we're going to shift to renewable energy tomorrow, are they going to be happy? Are they going to be supportive of that process? Of course not. So we've got to think about how do we make that transition, but including everybody that's going to be affected by that. So thanks for that feedback. I'm going to come back to the panelists now. One general question. In terms of this energy transition in the countries that you're working in, and we're saying trying to share experiences from different countries so we can look at this as a regional event. What sort of experience have you had of this sort of just energy transition process? Perhaps Dr. Shen, you're sort of nearest to me. As far as you're concerned, Is it something that you're looking at, the just energy transition area? What does that mean?
I think it is a challenging phase to all of us. Myself, actually, I'm in the automotive industry, and I was the engine expert at Ford Motor Company. So all my life, before I jumped to the electrical vehicle, I work in the engine industry very much. So while we're seeing the industry transferring from the burning fossil fuel to the electrified, as Jennifer mentioned. So it is, we look at all the workforce who are in the engine transmission industry, how they be able to transition to the electrical vehicles, that part. Then also all the network of the gasoline, diesel gasoline, all the gas stations, how they transfer into the electrification, the charging stations. So that is a society we are facing around, and which we have to, under the principle of the just energy transition, to deal with it.
And has this Climate Solutions Partnership, has that been helpful? How have you been involved with that?
Yeah, we are, New itself, we are partner with the China Map Petrol, for example, to look at it, how the industry-wise, how they transfer from this world towards that world, and the next generation-wise. Yeah, it is.
Okay, excellent. So let me pass along. I know, Jennifer, you already had a go, so I'm going to go to the other, or further on. Tim, if you're there, I mean, from HSBC's perspective, yeah, I mean, in terms of that experience, I mean, how would you say you're trying to drive this just energy transition? And then the links to CSP, how has that been sort of affected what you've been looking at?
Well, I mean, I'll start off by saying, you know, I'm not a climate specialist. I'm not a politician.
Yeah.
I'm just a very simple banker. Right? So I just put that out there. But, you know, for just an energy transition to take place, and I think we touched on it, one of the key things is going to be around mobilizing finance. Right? That is going to be a catalyst that will really drive this forward. And that, I think, is an area where a bank can play a role. And HSBC is trying to play a role in that part. And it's not just a question of us providing our own funding, because some of these projects are slightly out of the bankable space. But where banks have a role to play, it is to ensure that we bring in other forms of finance to create blended finance, to be able to support that. And so the art for banks going forward is going to be able to find out where are other pockets of liquidity that have different risk appetites that will be able to support this initiative. Now, we've done some stuff on our own. We're one of the founding members of GFANZ. Our co-CEO in the region is the vice chair of GFANZ Asia. We have launched a separate funding vehicle called Pentagreen, which is a joint venture between HSBC and Temasek, which is the Singaporean wealth fund, which will look at taking different portions of risk on projects so that we can provide funding that ensures that it's not just energy transition, but it's also done in a just and fair way. And as a bank that operates in 60 countries, and I can only talk for Vietnam, you know, Vietnam is a frontier market. It is critical that that transition takes place for the client, for the planet, but it also has to be done in a way where people are not left behind. And that, I think, is going to be, in some ways, even a bigger challenge than just the change in technology that's required to move to sort of renewable energies going forward. And the only other thing I would say is that as a bank that banks a lot of large companies, many of which are in the heavy carbon sector, our job is not to run away from them. Our job is to be able to work with them and provide the funding so that they, the biggest users of carbon, can transition. And I think that is a key point, that you cannot have finance running away from those companies. You've got to make sure that you are part of the solution for them. Yep. Because if you run away, they will have no other option than to keep going. And that, I don't think, will be beneficial to the planet or to civil society.
Well, that's great to hear, as you say, from Vietnam. I mean, I think very good examples of taking these steps forward, and great to hear from a banker who's talking about just transition, because that's often not the case. And it's great to hear that HSBC has been involved in that, and the CSP, the Climate Solutions Partnership, I think has facilitated that process. And indeed, moving over to you from the Indonesia perspective, I mean, from your country, how have you been involved in this? How has the partnership assisted?
Okay, thank you, Dan. First, PLN is state-owned electricity company in Indonesia. So mostly right now, the electricity is come from coal. But we have a roadmap to net zero emission. We have a plan to build new and renewable energy until 2040 is around 60 gigawatt. Yeah, this is comparing with the gas is 75 compared to 25% of the electricity. So after that, we also support our government. Our government has target of net zero emission in 2060. So we align our roadmap to the government also, and then some initiative until now, PLN also canceled many coal-fired power plant, new coal-fired power plant to the energy transition also. Yeah, and then you mentioned that GSP, we collaboration with WRI Indonesia to develop some biodiversity plan, and then we developed the process of product of PLN we call green energy as a service. Yeah, from a customer they want to buy some electricity from renewable energy to PLN. So there is some collaboration with WRI in Indonesia about the GSP program. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's great. Thanks. It's Jennifer, I was just when you were talking about what we need to be doing, I was intrigued that you were saying one aspect was we need to electrify everything, and that's certainly something that we're also looking at. But certainly we realise there are some industries, some activities which are very difficult for us to use renewable energy for. You know, not just the electrification, but because they're sort of high energy intense industries. So, for example, the steel industry or ceramics. Some of the transport sectors, aviation, shipping. Any thoughts from your side? I mean, from WRI, do you have any experience on trying to address those issues as well? Thoughts about renewable energy in that area, what we can be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that everyone knows that there is a sequencing that's going to occur if we're talking about electrifying everything. It's not that everything gets electrified in 2025. But we do know that there are a lot of capital planning activities that would be taking place now that would anticipate end-of-life decision-making and capital allocations for future years. And I think part of the challenge from within the corporate sector is to really connect with the business planning processes and the technology options that may be available and to anticipate what that may require. There are three things that I think. First, one, we know that today there are low temperature heat applications that we can go ahead and use. And in the United States, there's something called the Renewable Thermal Collaborative that WWF has been standing up that we think is an incredibly nice introduction. So if I recommend it to all of you. The second thing that we know is that the questions associated with the high temperature heat technologies are actually receiving a lot of R&D and attention right now. We know that there's a promise of hydrogen. We know that biomass biofuels are being considered for certain applications. And then the question is, what will that look like in the business context today? I am quite certain that there is a fair amount of financial analysis going on around what would make those viable. So part of what we have to do is be within our own institutions and as a collective set of partners, mapping through what is this next decade going to look like and how are we going to get from here to there. That's the transition planning. It's not sort of assuming that we have the specific answer today for how we're going to do it. It's about that process that gets us to where we need to be in the time frame that's needed and getting those near-term wins now. So anytime we've got an opportunity to do a capital replacement, that we are selecting for the technology, not that the vendor is coming to sell us, but that's on our plan. And we know how we're going to access that technology. Heat pumps are a perfect example. We know there are heat pumps available, not as much in Southeast Asia. Unfortunately, we really need to push that. But we know that China has a big supply of them. How do we get that into the country? And using the demand signals, using the supply side opportunities to create that business moment to change course.
No, thanks. That's actually very important as well, just to understand what are the constraints and what do we need to be doing to push this forward on the time frame that we're looking. Okay, so it's time for a bit of audience participation. You will see from our panel, we've got the different countries are represented, and everybody's giving their national perspective. But we said at the beginning, one of the potential benefits of having programs like the Climate Solutions Partnership is that we can look at the regional aspect. So I just want to ask everybody here, I mean, who's here from, who has any links to Vietnam? Okay, yes, yes. Indonesia? Yeah, that's good. We've got the WRI, you've got to have links to everything. That's the main thing. That's good, just leave it there, yeah. China? Yep. And India? Okay, so we've got all of the countries represented here, and others. So I want to ask you from that side, what sort of experience do you have in your country that you think could be interesting for other countries in this whole area of energy transition? And what's important? Is it financing? Is it the sort of the corporate perspective to try to have to push these things forwards? And we need the corporates to invest more time and effort? Is it the policy frameworks? Is it the utilities that should be involved to drive this whole process? What's your feeling on that? So don't be afraid, just give me an idea of what you think is this a focus area for your experience, your country. I'm going to grab the mic while you're thinking, okay? All right, so I'm going to come on to India.
All right, thanks. So I think one of the aspects that's really important for large-scale energy transition is policy signaling. Whether the government is giving clear signals to all the stakeholders who are part of the energy transition ecosystem. I think in India, it has really worked because of this. There have been ambitious renewable energy targets, both looking at large-scale grid connectivity as well as decentralized renewable energy. I think from India perspective, that is one thing that has worked, which has actually rallied different stakeholders to come together. Now we see a lot of corporates doing on their own, trying to green their supply chains, and also a lot of industries are also trying to integrate renewable energy, even trying to wheeling it from other states where there are more renewable energy and trying to feed that into their supply chain. I think from Indian perspective, I think policy signaling would be really important aspect.
Okay, great. So the policy side, yeah, please.
Okay. So from my perspective, I think, yeah, I agree. The policy is the one challenge.
Which country are you representing?
I think from Vietnam.
From Vietnam, thank you.
But maybe it's similar with another country in the region. But we need to go together. We see challenge, of course, on policy, but we need also finance. Also, if we have a policy, how we can invest, and also the capacity and technology. I think everything should be to go together. So corporate also need to be understanding why they have to change, why they have to install all the renewable energy. So I think to be a successful transition in the country, in like Vietnam, I think all the area have to go together.
Right.
So I think that's from my side. Thank you.
Okay, no, thanks very much. I think that's actually perhaps a useful perspective, is to say that it perhaps it's not financing or policy or implementation or corporate investment. In fact, it's all of those things together that we have to try to work on. Okay, so Dr. Shen, now you don't have a microphone. Let me come to you. Oh, sorry, I've got another.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Come on, sorry.
I'm used to being on Zoom calls.
Yeah, yeah. No,
thumbs up, +1 on the policy.
Yeah.
But also the utility business model. And we really appreciate the partnership with PLN and the leadership from PLN to think through how can the utility adapt to the energy transition. It goes to the financing and your utility clients. How can you push them to be forward thinking on how they can support the transition, how they can support their clients, the customers. That is a huge additional piece. It's really exciting. So thank you.
Well, thanks very much. I mean, that's actually useful. And perhaps let's use that just to go to back to Anindita. I mean, from the PLN perspective, I mean, what can utilities be doing? I mean, in terms of safeguards, protection issues, I mean, how important is it for you to have robust social safeguards to make sure that we have this just transition on the process? I mean, is that something that you're looking at in particular in terms of accelerating towards renewable energy?
Yeah. I think for the robust safeguard and safeguard can help and mitigate our environmental. As I mentioned before, that we have planned to build more renewable energy. When we build more renewable energy, there is we must consider our environmental also. Sometimes when we build the project in other side, maybe in the mountain of the when we build the hydro, so there is some pollution from the project. So there is for the safeguard, this is important things. Can we make some guidelines to the support the project of renewable energy next of the until 2040 we have a plan of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, thanks very much. That's useful. Let's come on. I mean, Dr. Shin, I was going to ask you again more about corporates in general. I mean, I think there's a general feeling that there needs to be more investment from the large corporates into this whole area of transition. I mean, what do you think we should be doing in terms of motivating that sort of scale-up of solutions? I think there is evidence of many corporate companies that see the need for this transition and putting in place perhaps some small activities in different places to try to demonstrate that they're committed towards this whole process. But we need to scale up these issues. How do you think we can best do that in practice?
Well, it's very good. It's very good to share some of our thoughts in this forum. As some of you mentioned, we are in the middle of the transition, and by joining the COP28, we all feel it, feel the passion, feel the challenging. We are in the automotive engineering. If you look at the IEA Net Zero 2050 report, say the overall transportation probably takes about a quarter of total carbon emissions. Then automotive-wise, passenger vehicle-wise, probably take about 10% around. So it's quite a big part. Then we're seeing the whole industry, as Jennifer saying, we're transitioning from the gasoline engine, ICE engine vehicles to the electrical vehicle. Then if you look at number, actually, if I take China as example, the penetration rate increasing tremendously. It's much faster than the government originally forecasted. In 2020 October, China government forecast to say by 2035, China would have 50% of the new car sales as the new energy vehicle. Now look at today, after about 3 years, we're seeing that milestone will be fulfilled 10 years earlier. So by 2025, we believe this 50% will be over. So that is, we're seeing the transition is quite fast growing. Then if you look at around the world, for a country like Norway, the new energy vehicle penetration rate is already over 90%, which is the number one ahead of many others. Then many Nordic countries, they are like Sweden, they are quite penetration rate is quite high as well. So we're seeing the transition. Then the infrastructure is changing as well. So you gradually start to seeing the rest area around the highway without gas station, only with a charging station. That happens. New itself, we are not only installing lots of the charging pillar, but we do the swap stations as well, as some of you may know that. And swap station brings another dimension of the helpful in low carbon emission, not only for electrified vehicle, but also as energy storage device. So that is where try to making contribution towards
Okay.
that goal as well. So in a nutshell, pretty much we're seeing the whole industry around the world is changing. Region by region, the pace is different. I was chatting with,
Yeah.
yeah, so chatting, see how they, PLN is installing, is setting up the infrastructure in Indonesia. I was chatting with how many penetration rate in Indonesia. Could be today's penetration rate is low, so region by region could different, but the experience-wise, we can share each other, see how we bring together, because Earth is only one. So that is, I think, it's very meaningful, and I'm here to able to participate in COP28, and I dialogue with many people, do feel from the heart, it is we should cooperate together to make the change happen.
I think this cooperation, again, is a critical point, and I think this is one word that I've heard over and over again, which we have to all buy into, and that's together. Because we can't do this on our own. We have to be working with others to take this further forwards. So just for my own interest, electric vehicles. This is a market assessment for you, Dr. Chan. Okay, so who's got an electric vehicle? Not bad. Who would like to have an electric vehicle? Okay, there you go. Market, regional market for you. So we can take that. All right, so let's get serious on the finance, because we know that one of the big barriers to this transition is the fact that renewable energy is capital intensive. It's not like you turn the switch and you pay for your electricity per kilowatt. You've actually got to invest in the structure in most renewable energy cases. I mean, obviously exceptions to that. So it's really access to finance, which is one of the critical areas. So from an HSBC perspective, I mean, we know that you're members of GFANS, so there's lots of talking at that sort of level going on, and about facilities and work in process, and you're looking at different partnerships. But how do you address this sort of accessibility? So people that don't necessarily have the track records, are there facilities that they can use? Is that something that you're looking at?
Well, the short answer to that is yes, we are looking at that. But again, each project has a different risk profile, and we just have to make sure that the risk profile is aligned to what the financier's risk appetite is. So for a bank, our funding comes from depositors, so we have a slightly less high risk appetite than maybe some funds might have. And one of the key aspects of COP28 for me, as someone who's not a climate specialist, is it's all down to collaboration. It is collaboration between the public sector, the private sector, but it's also collaboration between banks and different forms of finance. We have the ability to bring different forms of finance in to help structure different transactions. And if we look at Vietnam as a case in point, total debt in the banking system is roughly $400 billion. The amount the country needs to spend by 2050 is between $350 and $400 billion. So the reality is the banking sector cannot fund that in its entirety. The reality is that the government can't finance it in its entirety. And so it's going to require collaboration between government, between local banks, international banks, to marshal funds from overseas to be able to bring that in. And that's not just a financing question. Then you have to create the right regulatory environment to entice those funds in, because funding is fungible. And the reality is investors will go to where they get the best returns. And it might be Taiwan over Vietnam, as an example.
Right.
And so as an international bank, we have a job to share what we think is the best structure for these transactions to get the best value out of it.
Okay.
But I would just finish on saying our funding isn't related just to renewable energies. We have created a fund which will contribute $1 billion to innovation. A lot of the solutions to today's problems haven't even been created yet. And as a bank, to be able to provide that level of sort of seed capital to solving the problems of tomorrow, I think is critical. And we have to take that long-term view. And so we have created that, because whether it's carbon capture or battery capabilities, there are small companies somewhere in the world that are thinking about these solutions, and they need access to capital as well. It's not just the renewable energy, wind turbines or solar coverage. And then the final thing I'll say is we made a commitment as an organization to try and raise between $750 million and $1 trillion by 2030. As of last month, we were at about $220 billion. So we're short of where we need to be, but I'm just hoping that it was always going to be a ramp-up phase, but we have very strong commitment that we're all going to be part of the solution, right? It can't just be banks and it can't just be governments, all of us, even individuals, right? I mean, I put my hand up, I drive an EV car because I think it was an Indian statesman said that be the change you want to see in others, so it has to start with us.
Just to clarify that, you're saying the facility to $1 trillion and you're at 220 at the moment, but that's for energy transition work, or that's what's the
That
focus?
covers everything, so it's renewable energy, sustainable finance, but we
Okay.
made that commitment about 5 or 6 years ago that we would help raise between $750 billion and $1 trillion by 2030.
That's great. No, again, it's very good to see that, you know, the different stakeholders, including some of the key financiers, do recognise the issues and the fact that we've got to put ourselves out in an innovative sense. And I think, Jennifer, that's what you were talking about earlier, you know, the fact that we've got these issues which need some sort of innovation to take forwards. But in terms of the regional perspective, I get the impression that there's good things happening in Indonesia, there's good things happening in China, Vietnam we've heard about, India we've heard about. What can we do to bring all of this together to maximise the value? I think it's something that the Climate Solutions Partnership has been looking at with those countries. But again, from WRI experience, are there sort of routes to be able to coordinate this and maximise the value of that interaction?
Yeah, I am. There are a number of different routes, and I'm so appreciative of the fact that we're having this conversation and for the Clean Solutions Partnership, because in fact what we recognize is there isn't one sector, one organization that will be able to bring this forward or bring this together. And I look at the various intergovernmental institutions and sort of say, how do we leverage what they're doing, right? The Clean Energy Ministerial was hosted by India this year, tremendous amount of really important political conversations about pathways and various work streams and initiatives that SEM organizes. But that's at a certain level. We're talking about how you access and engage at institutional levels that will allow those innovative elements to come forward so that we can learn collectively. And that requires that we be in country, in the region, working on the ground on these things and testing things out and recognizing that we have the need to learn from each other. And one thing that I would just say about that is that we have to go beyond the project and individual organization by individual project and organization model. And we have to look at cross-cutting opportunities. I mentioned heat pumps earlier. I think it's time that we actually said, what does it take to bring a portfolio of projects together because of these different risk appetites? What does it take to innovate a finance model that delivers that? You know, you look at what EESL did in India for LED lighting, street lights, et cetera. You immediately, with the Super ESCO, were able to deploy a massive scaling. And that's really what we're talking about needing to do here. Massive scaling. How do we think about the geothermal potential in Indonesia in ways that doesn't have to be examined project by project? Certainly there are those elements as well, but somebody needs to aggregate. And that aggregation mechanism is the only way we get speed and scale.
Yep, we've got to get the scale. Okay, look, I mean, thanks very much for all the input. I'm going to, because we're running out of time, so I'm going to come back to all of the panelists. I'm going to ask you to say, in less than 1 minute, what do you think is the main priority action that you would like to see happening, or you feel like you could be facilitating something to happen? But what is the most important thing as far as you're concerned if we're going to achieve this transition? So I'll let you think about that for 1 second. Turning to the audience, last chance. Any questions that you would like to put? We have one on the back here. Thanks. Please.
Hi, I'm Ina. I'm here with Duke University. I have a question for teams, actually. I'm curious, HSBC as a frontier for in climate finance space, not only like a defense member, but also a partner with JETP project in Vietnam. I wonder what are the actions are needed for other commercial banks in Asia to actually play a role in financing energy projects or even adaptation projects. The other question is, I'm curious, like, what does a conversation look like with clients, like, who are interested in financing energy in general?
Okay, so on the first question, what are other banks doing? I mean, I can't comment on markets outside Vietnam, but what I've seen is a very strong receptivity from Vietnamese banks to come forward and look to learn. And so about 2 weeks ago, we ran a workshop together with the World Bank, with GFANZ, but also the State Bank of Vietnam, which is the regulator. And over 20 Vietnamese banks came, which I think, and it was voluntary. They weren't told to come. So, you know, we as a bank can be a catalyst for change. We're fortunate we're an international bank. We've probably been sensitized to what's happened in different markets, and we can bring some of that knowledge to the other banking to the other banking players. And the reality is the demand for finance is so great that it's not going to be one bank that's going to do it, right? We're going to have to collaborate with other banks, and different Vietnamese banks have different risk profiles from us. So I see it as a positive step, certainly in Vietnam. And the one thing that I would say about Vietnam is that when the country makes a decision to do something, it has the ability to move relatively quickly once that commitment has been made. Now, I can't comment on other countries because I'm not there at the moment and I haven't worked there. So I think there's real receptivity from the state, from the government, from the regulators to try and push this agenda item, and they've come on board. The second question was, sorry, I forgot the second question. The second question was,
What would the conversation look like with clients for financing or involved in energy space?
so we have many, many clients, and I think one of the things we said here was one size doesn't fit all. So there are different clients at different stages of their understanding, their knowledge, and their commitment to change. What we have found is that some of the largest companies are still at the learning stage, but we've seen huge receptivity in Vietnam to try and learn, and what does it mean? What technologies are out there? How much will it cost me? What sort of funding is available? How do I transition? So they're very much at that learning stage, but they learn quickly and they adapt quickly. So when I put my hand up and said I drive an EV, I drive a Vietnamese EV, and this is a company that was established, or the EV component was established 2 or 3 years ago. So it just shows that once they do understand, once they do make the commitment, once they do feel that they have financial support, they're willing to move relatively quickly. But the short answer is every customer is at a different stage on their journey towards understanding what does it mean for them and how do they adapt. And part of us as a bank is just to share the knowledge we have. Because it's not just us financing people. We also have to look to make our own operations net zero, right? It's not just a question of saying, well, we'll finance all of you, but we'll continue to have data centers that pollute, or CEOs who drive in internal combustion engines, right? So we also have to make some changes ourselves, but everyone's at a different stage of progression. But what I would say in Vietnam is most corporates are keen to learn and keen to adapt.
Great. Okay, thanks very much. All right, so we're going to have to leave on there on the questions. You've now got 30 seconds each, okay? So what is the most important action that you think we should be taking to move ahead? And indeed, I'll start on your side.
Okay, thank you. Then, for my perspective, there is actually energy transition in Indonesia is very challenging. Many location of the source and demand is separately. So we need collaboration with all the institution, policy institution, financial, and also like the WRI, we collaboration about the safeguard. So the key is how to PLN and also in Indonesia collaboration with the global institution and global, local and global institution. There is
okay. Perfect. Thanks, Tim.
I would just say that start making change today. Don't wait for tomorrow, because climate change isn't something that someone else will do. We're all going to have to do it. And as soon as we realize that, whether it's from our own behaviors or from a professional level, on a personal level, we have to start with that today.
Great thought. Thanks. Jennifer?
Aggregate for scale.
I like that. You've still got 28 seconds left. No, that's very good. Aggregate for scale. That's a critical point. Thanks very much. Dr. Shen. Sorry, you have a mic? Yeah, okay.
I think from the passenger automotive wise, one side we hope making effort in the transition towards electrification faster, more, which equipped with technology advancement, so power density, infrastructure will be better. The other side, all the electricity supply will be more renewable, more green. So which is then that world will becomes more green. Yeah.
That's great. Well, look, thanks very much, everybody. I'll just add in our perspective from a WWF point of view, because clearly the message that's coming out of here is that we've all got to change ourselves. We've got to move towards this new future, this renewable energy future. That's a big transition. But ourselves is not enough. We need to do that, all of us, and we need to try to work together to take this forwards, because in the end, there's only one planet out there, and we're all part of that. So as far as we're concerned, we're feeling it's a 100% renewable energy future we need to be aiming at. It's going to take some time, but it needs to take a shorter and shorter time, because we don't have a lot of time left. So we've got to get to 100% renewables faster than we're currently being considering. We don't have enough time. Even I think net zero 2050 is a bit optimistic. But we've got to be greener. We've got to think about the environmental impact of what we're doing as well. We don't want to create a nature crisis as well as the climate crisis and the energy crisis. But most importantly, we've got to be fairer. And fairer means climate justice in terms of let's look at the people that have been responsible for this and make sure that those countries are going to be supporting the ones that have felt the effects most badly. But of course, we want a just energy transformation. And to achieve that, we have to do it together. So let me leave it there. Thanks very much to the panelists. Thanks very much to all of you for being involved. And we hope we can work on this and take it forward. Thanks.